Well, Brett Sutton resigned last week. He's got himself a nice comfy job at the CSIRO, where he can spout his brand of science and gain endless adoration from the single cat ladies and the middle-aged, bored, unsatisfied married women. Remember, it's a big club, and you ain't in it. Well, the non-Aussies might be asking, who is this sexy boy? Well, he is the asshat who thought it would be a good idea to close down playgrounds and keep kids locked at home. And then once they were allowed back to school, his guidance kept them masked up. And that's still being advised today on the VicGov websites. His underlings convinced society that wearing a mask makes you a superhero, and the old ladies calling out the government's bullshit should be met with violence from the cops. The police got drunk on the power his advice gave them, so much so that they used all sorts of weapons on the public. He conned people into believing that selected bureaucrats need not comply with rules that the rest of us had to follow. And what are these? These are the magic circles which Brett's team advised would protect tennis fans from the virus, blessed by the dancing nurses of TikTok. He sent out useless paper shufflers into society, full of smug self-importance, as they made sure that hard-working business owners obeyed all of their overly officious rules. And of course, we have to remember that millions of lives were saved by the squads of employees who were sanitising lampposts and tram stops. Is it any wonder why Victoria's in such debt now? Look at this. Do you ever look back on your life and recall something you did that was really embarrassing? I really feel sorry for whoever these people are. And his guidance also led to many organisations in Victoria forcing staff out or sacking them due to nonsensical mandates. I've already done videos on some of these organisations, exposing the likes of Vic Roads and the City of Melbourne Council. But if the virus was so dangerous, and the vaccine was the key to saving us all, then why was he so blasé about MPs being exempt from the mandates?
Oh yeah, that's not a watering down. That's specific advice, legal advice, and supported by the Solicitor General that there are constitutional and other legal protections for some of those groups that mean that a mandate was really not a recommendation for those groups.
And will that apply to MPs too? I mean, are those state MPs in the Parliament?
Yeah, I believe so. Again, legal impediments or legal recommendations that MPs can't be within those mandates. That's not to say that there aren't other mechanisms for MPs to be managed, but the Treasurer can speak to that.
So just to clarify, that is no longer... MPs are no longer part of the public health order?
No, MPs have not been part of the mandate for legal advice around that. But as I understand it, not required for MPs in Victoria as well.
It still enrages me to see that, and how many of the staff who were sacked and how many of the staff who took the jab under duress were aware of this. All animals are equal, hey? And do not forget that he got to travel, to collect an award and get his weasel greased on the taxpayer's dollar, all while we were still locked down. Despite all of this, he has a cult-like following and some very dedicated devotees, and they'll never see through his crap because he's so dreamy. T-shirts with his face on them, masks as well. People wetting themselves when he took his top off. Read this from The Guardian from last week. Farewell, Brett Sutton. The Silver Fox Chief Health Officer Victorians couldn't keep their eyes off. Like a superhero in an open-necked shirt and a vaguely sexy beard, he emerged during the COVID crisis to keep us safe. And now he's gone. Fucking assholes. And what about the calendar? One of his fans created a Brett Sutton calendar with proceeds going to charity. Sounds all fine to me, I've no issue with that. If you can raise money for a worthwhile cause, then go for it. But I ended up a while back in a Twitter chat with one of the women behind this, and they were so proud of their 2,000 copies they'd sold so far, which I worked out to have been about $70,000 that they'd raised. I proposed that she and I could have worked together to raise much more than that by suggesting a reduction in the amount of Victorian public service staff and perhaps getting rid of the CHO altogether, which would save way more than 70 grand, or maybe that we defund the ABC. She did not take me up on this offer. What I hadn't accounted for were the costs involved in producing the calendar, so when I checked in a few months later, I discovered that it had not been 70 grand that they made, but barely 24,000. Some of it going to a charity or a charity for survivors of torture, which sounds like some sort of charity for all Victorians living under Dan Andrews and Brett's made-up rules. As Sam Hyde says, these people are always going on about helping society, but they're unwilling to look at the inefficiencies in these hallowed institutions. So what did he have to say for himself in his final press conference as a CHO? It was the expected humble brag, praising all around him for his support and deflecting to all the scary death threats that he got. I mean, I would condemn anyone who genuinely sent him a death threat, but I would also question how much of that was serious and how much of it is a convenient deflection from fair criticism of him. McGowan in WA and the other prick up in the NT used the exact same tactics. I mean, back in my younger days when I worked in pubs, I must have had about 10 death threats a week. It's not nice, but also I know most of it wasn't serious. There was no public outpouring of sympathy for me and my co-workers. We just got on with shit.
You know, you can throw in the vitriol and the death threats and the intrusions and the kind of barrage of lies that you see, especially in social media.
He also mentioned that it's okay to criticise him in his farewell speech, but it's absolutely not. Nobody was allowed to criticise him. He wouldn't respond to anything other than 100% unconditional praise.
Critiques are totally fine. Accountability is appropriate for any public office holder, but the BS that he sometimes spouted out there is quite extraordinary sometimes. And
finally, when asked if he had any regrets, there was a tiny bit of remorse, but the response was purely a performative gesture.
There shouldn't be a person in the world who's been part of the public health response who wouldn't reflect on things that they would do differently, things that they regret. I'm absolutely no different in that regard.
If he truly felt any regret at some of his actions and the guidance he'd given, then wouldn't the right thing to do be to tell us what he regretted and perhaps offer an apology? How about saying sorry to all those who lost their jobs over your daft mandates? And why were you so quiet about the MPs being exempt from the mandates? And what about apologising to the families of those who just couldn't take you and Dan Andrews' ridiculous rules any longer? I fucking despise these useless high-paid bureaucrats.